Hello. Today, I am very pleased to have a super special guest here. And for me, as a ThunderCats fan, it's an honor to actually meet uh, this person. I never thought in my wildest dream I'll ever meet any of these people that have been responsible for creating such memorable stories that I grew up with. It's none other than the fantastic, magnificent Peter Lawrence. He is one of the ThunderCats writers, SilverHawks writers, and many other shows as well. Hello and good afternoon, Peter, and thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to me about a lot of things.
Well, first of all, it's absolutely my pleasure. And I only recently really connected with this amazing fan base. I actually don't much like the word fan. I think of you as aficionados, kind of family of aficionados. And, after the show, sure, I got a couple of interviews and connected with a couple of people. But it was really when Buddha wrote his first book. And I had very briefly been in contact with him years ago. And he asked me if I'd, write this or that or the other or be interviewed. I can't remember exactly. And we kind of struck up a friendship. And he's a great guy. And this plugged me back into plugged me into this whole incredible unit. It's just unbelievable to me because we're talking about 40 years later, you know. And I don't, it's, I mean, if I'm not sure if this is the information, the kind of material you want, but you stop me if I'm off course, right? So, so anyway, I redesigned my website and I thought, I'll add a ThunderCats page and I'll just write, 4 or 5 stories about my involvement. No more, not that's all. And I started, and I thought, the more I got into it, the more I thought, God, I need to talk to Matthew because I don't remember this, that, or the other, and suddenly I started writing about the crew, and then I realized, well, wait a minute, there's no show without the people who watch it. So, starting with Buddha, I started to contact a few of the kind of family, if you like. And I can't remember whether you were third or second or third or whatever it was. And it's obviously you can tell I'm completely gobsmacked by the interest that remains. And in fact, yesterday I was lecturing at a university, and the theme was actually fairly, not complicated, but the theme was to do with artificial intelligence and left brain, right brain, and how we've lost empathy and use of metaphor and so on and so forth. But in the introduction, I said, look, this is what I'm going to talk about, but you're welcome to interrupt and ask any questions you like. So I just got started, and some guy says, how did you get to ThunderCats? This is a guy who's 22 years old, a university student in Colombia. And so I said, well, and how did you start writing? So I told him that, it wasn't quite Thundercat specific. And then I was just about to get back into the theme. And another guy said, Thundercats was the most important thing in my life. I looked at him and said, you're 22 years old or 21 or 18 or whatever. What are you talking about? This is 40 years ago, But anyway, so I was there, I talked for 2 hours. And I would think that an hour at least was Thundercats. And then at the end of it all, this young guy came up who hadn't been in the lecture because he was somewhere else. And obviously one of the guys in the lecture had called him, and he showed up with a full package of Thundercats videos. And he said, would you sign it? And I said, well, of course. And again, I remember he's 20 years old. And he said, my grandmother gave me these, and my mother was the fan, and she turned me on to it, and this is such a privilege, and so on and so forth. And the circle it's come full circle. And I thought, this is insane. This is insane.
It,
But
it's
anyway,
it's it's fantastic, that it's good to hear how the next generation and the next generation get to experience Thundercats. I mean, like you said, you are 20,
yeah,
you're not supposed to be familiar with this, but I mean, I got my granny hooked, and I got my nephew hooked. So I had two completely different generations above me and below me
yeah.
that I got hooked because of my love for Thundercats, and it's wonderful to hear. It's something that all generations across the world are actually clinging on to and
Right.
falling in love with, no matter how old you are.
Yeah, well, this will actually, I mean, interest you particularly. That one of those two that came up said to me, and we had a coffee afterwards. This said, he said, what I really want to do is I want to work with the toys. I want to be in that toy business. And I said, well, what else? He said, Super 7. He said, I want to work for Super 7. He said that and I said, what else? Remember these, Columbia kids. And he said, well, I'm a great designer. I can design, I can market, I can do this, that, and the other. And I thought, okay,
It's really cool. That's so cool. Well, yes, as you can see, I'm a big Super 7 fan. I love their toys,
yeah.
and I mean it's bringing the cartoon to life for me. But you and I have something in common that most Thundercats fans do not have in common. You grew up in the south of Africa. So would you say having experienced Africa shaped you as a writer and also your perception of things?
Yeah, no, I mean, I grew up in the northwestern province of Zambia, in the most remote area you can possibly think of. I was, my father was originally a colonial administrator, and when I was living there, there were 11 Europeans and one white kid, who was me. And so all my friends were from, and not to beat about the bush, no pun intended, that was a while ago, and the kind of level of, I don't know, it was just a while ago. It was a different world, and my friends were the kids from two tribes either side of the river. Um, and I'm trying to think of that great movie, The Power of One. If you remember that, The Power of One, that 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 kid's life at the beginning of that movie was exactly my life. And I would be sent to school. Oh, it was only a few hundred miles away, but in Central Africa at that time, that's a hell of a distance. Two flights and a truck ride. And I hated it. I hated it. I hated that school. I hated the discipline. I hated everything. I only survived because I was luckily pretty good at sport and also because I knew how to fight. So, I mean, I know it sounds a little melodramatic, but I cannot tell you how much I hated it. Because in the holidays, what I've missed out is that my mother spent a lot of time in South America, and so I basically lived there in that particular place with my father, who was an alcoholic. And so, he'd have a few gins, and I'd say, "Well, I'm going fishing, Dad," and that was it. I mean, I had a 22 Hornet. I had a great fishing rod. I could use his. He had a boat with one of those terrible British Seagull outboard motors, and the son of our major Mayordomo was my great buddy, and so I mean, I spent my entire life, out of school life, just living in the bush. And when my mother was there, I mean, it's very hard for anybody to believe this. Actually, I wrote about it in a book, but they, they had gone through the Second World War, obviously, and death and destruction was much closer to them than it is to us. And they would say, I'd say, "What are you going to do today, Pete?" I thought, "I'm going fishing with Landy, or I'm going to take the gun and shoot a spurwing goose or whatever." They would just be careful. you know, crocodiles, mambas, whatever there was, you know, if I'm going to go and climb the mango trees, and well, remember there are green mambas in the trees. And I think that if something had happened, of course they'd have been devastated, but I think they'd have been disappointed too, you know, disappointed in me. Because so that's how I grew up. And no television, no comics. My father was a tremendous reader despite his alcoholism. And so I read adult books, Second World War books from a very early age. So when I started to write, that was my kind of experience base, if you like. And you know, it's a cliche, they say this. If you have ever engaged in Africa, let alone grown up there, it's in your heart, it's in your soul. And so even now, you know, 300 years later, when people, particularly in Colombia, people say to me, well, where are you from? I say, Africa. It comes out. And, you know, when I first went to England, I hated it. And I had the same problems as, you know, I mean, luckily sport saved me. I mean, that's what saved me. So, and you ask whether Africa affects my writing. I've written two books based in Africa, my own as a sort of it's part autobiography and part fantasy. And I wrote a historical novel, which is very, very deeply researched by my father, actually, about the Matabele War and you know, what happened in Central Africa and so on and so forth. Um, as it affects ThunderCats, probably not, except as a sort of background. Actually, no, I need to come back to that because another thing about growing up in Africa, I think, particularly in a remote area, is that willy-nilly you develop a kind of fatalism, you know, and it's a genuine fatalism. It's not a kind of European um, miserable pessimism. It's a real fatalism. Um, it's almost like a Zen fatalism, and certainly in Central Africa, certainly where I was, because where I was, you know, wasn't. I mean, sure, of course, there was racial prejudice and all that crap, but it wasn't actually an apartheid state. You know, I mean, it was separated, but it wasn't. It was separated, but wasn't legally separated. And you know, certainly in my case. You know, I mean, I remember I had one zing argument with Landy, who said, because I made a terrible mistake and and as a result of that mistake, his father beat him. And when I was trying to, you know, we were trying to get back together, he said, you don't understand. You're not African. I said, what are you talking about? I hear, what? What? No. You can't be white. You can't be an African. You can't be white. So, you know, at a very, very early age, when you have those kind of experiences, which I'm sure you did in a slightly different context, you cannot not be affected by it unless you're completely oblivious to what's going on around you. So, yeah, I mean, I'm sure that has affected a lot of my writing. And of course, when I went on to Johnny Quest, I basically wrote Johnny, his personality, much as I as I was at that age, or maybe younger, actually. And people would said, "Well, you're Johnny Quest," and it was kind of a compliment, but also embarrassing because I didn't really mean to do it.
Mm.
If any of that makes sense, that's my answer to you.
Yes, it actually does. I think maybe it makes perhaps a bit more sense to me because I am also African. from
Yeah,
Africa, if I can put it like that. So I understand the situation and
yeah.
your base where you're working from. So if you're not from here, you might not even understand what we're talking about. But it's good because there is a part of Thundercats. Well, we are assuming that it's taking place in Egypt in the far future. Um, so would you say that because the episodes that you wrote for Thundercats, um, it drew from your personal African life, like your surroundings and things like that? Did you work it in deliberately into your stories, or was it just that is your frame of work that you base things off? It just happened naturally. Did Africa
Yeah,
have that kind of influence in there?
yeah, there was no deliberate reference. And remember that with Thundercats, unlike Silverhawks, I mean, I only arrived on the scene. I'm never sure about this. I think it was round about I arrived on the scene, I think round about episode 6. Um, I only took over the head writer, around about 12 or 15. So, Len had really set the stage. And in fact, there was a post on Facebook the other day. I think it was from, what's his name? Gautier. What's his name? Anyway, he's a tremendous archivist of Thundercats. And there was a long statement about Len. And Len really, I mean, he laid a foundation, and he was cheated out of his rightful credit. Actually, he should have been a producer, but certainly out of money. But he had created that whole kind of Mum-Ra, ancient spirits of evil, quasi Egyptian thing, which I loved. And I mean, I think, may speak very badly of me, but the characters that I love writing are the bad guys. I mean, I love writing Mum-Ra. I love writing Monstar. They're much more interesting, you know.
Well, it's a funny thing that you say that. I know I'm throwing this back to the toys because um when I've spoken with Brian Flynn about when they create characters, it's always more fun for them to do the bad guys than it is the good guys. I mean, the good guys are supposed to be the straight and narrow, but the bad guys have got a lot more scope and color to work with that
Yeah,
you can dig into the nitty-gritty stuff that you're not like this, but you can just go crazy. And I understand
yeah,
that.
no.
So as
And I mean, actually, the other thing that Len did, of course, which was, I mean, very good idea, was that he made Lano basically an adolescent in an adult's body. So at least you weren't dealing with a, perfect, um, unconquerable character, you know, because he had his vulnerabilities, had his weaknesses.
he was a stubborn little boy
Yeah,
at the start. But I mean, you could see him grow. That's the good thing. He was not perfect. He was never perfect from the start. He grew as the show grew, and so we
yeah,
all grew with him. So now you've mentioned that you joined Thundercats early on, around about episode 6, but your in terms of the episode numbers that you have writing credit for is episode 15. It's the time capsule. Wait, I've got my little time capsule here, so I put it aside. I'm so glad that we got this. The you introduced a lot of things in this episode, like I've got them here as well. We've got the space boards,
yeah,
got
yeah, yeah.
Wily Kid and Wily Cat. We've got the crabmen, the weapons that are voice activated, and then of course we've got, where is she? She's here. This is such a cool thing. This is the Black Widow shot.
Yeah.
So these characters had their debut there. Were they your creations? did you how the thing is I don't know how this worked. So you were given a, a guideline of say this is where the story is going. You need to fill the gaps in here, or what was the instruction when you got the opportunity to write? How did it all go?
Well,
How did it
I
happen?
tell you, I mean, it's a pity that Len, well, actually, he wouldn't talk about it even if he was here. What happened was that I had, and again, everyone, if I run over or irrelevant, just stop me. I had written a movie of the week for Jules Bass, and it was very stressful. I mean, it was very, very difficult. Well, stressful. I don't really feel anyway. It was a disaster, but we got on pretty well. And a couple of years after that, I was working on a photographic shoot in Portugal, and I don't know how, to this day, I don't know how he got hold of me. But a call came into the house that we were staying and shooting at. Beautiful house, big kind of chateau. Um, and I ignored it because it can't be for me. And it was Jules. And so to get over here, I've got this show. I'm having trouble with writing, getting it written, and it's an animated show. And I said, Jules, I don't know anything about animation. I've written one animated piece in my life. It was a 3-minute commercial for Firestone tires. I don't read comic. I never grew up with comic books. I don't know anything about it. I know nothing about it. Get over here. I said, well, he, I said, well, okay, how much you pay? I think he said $2,500 a script. I said, you're out of your mind. I'd just been paid 40 grand to write a movie for an Italian. No, I'm not coming over there. You're out of your mind. So anyway, I arrived, and I think this is, forgive me, I actually don't know for sure. I think they had about 6 scripts done, and I think they had about 6 in the pipeline. And Len, for all his talent, just could not run a writing team, A, and B, they couldn't find writers, which I mean I can come back to if you like. So anyway, Jules, um, you know, said write a script, and I wrote a script. It might have been Time Capsule, I don't remember. And I came back the next day, and every single page had red felt tip all over it. This is blah. I mean, just rude comments, insulting comments, just nasty stuff. He could be a very nasty guy. And I thought, forgive my language, fuck it, I'm going back. I don't need this. And then I thought, no, I'm not going to give up that easy. So I wrote it again, rewrote it. Next day, I took in a day, put it on his desk, came back, and every other page had red on it. So I wrote it 3 times, 4 or 5 times before it actually went through. And that was my education. And in fairness to Jules, don't think he was much of a writer. But boy, he knew how to analyze a script, and he knew animation. And we had to write in a very specific style for the Rankin Bass system. So I think that by the time I kind of nailed it, if I ever did, I think we had probably those 12 scripts in motion, and then I probably edited a couple, and then along came number 15, which I think was my first one. And by that time, I basically took over as head writer. And Len, Jules shuffled him to one side, but gave him, it was a very smart move, the kind of franchise, if you like, to write the 5-parters. And I said to Jules, look, I don't want to edit Len. I don't want to have that job because we're very, very different. We have a very completely different style. He created the show, and he has a much clearer or more specific view of what the show's about than I do. And anyway, his first comment about me was, "Who is this fucking Englishman?" I don't want to deal with that, you know. So Jules did most of the editing of Len's stuff. I mean, and then Lee would look at it and put notes on it, and I would maybe took a final pass. So that's how that happened. And you know, from then on, it was basically effectively, in story terms, my show to run. Now, Lee Donica, rest in peace, a great, wonderful woman, and completely insanely dedicated to ThunderCats. Lee had a very, very close watching brief on the script. And she had she was like, if you like, the kind of policewoman of ThunderCats. But she also, I don't know whether she encouraged, but anyway, what happened was that, as you know, because you know the show probably now better than I do, the the scripts go off in all kinds of different directions. I mean, you compare a Bill Overgard script with a Len Starr script, and it's just bizarre. And yet somehow they all held together. But there was no overall, pick up on your question, there was no overall direction other than what came from me. Um, I I guess I occasionally would redirect a story at the outline stage or maybe even at first draft. And the biggest change, I think, came around about, I would think probably about episode 20, when I suddenly realized that almost everybody was writing a guest star. And wait a minute, this isn't the show. The show is not about Mongol, it's about the Thundercats. And you can't you can't send me an idea. Well, the Thundercats are all on holiday and this and that and the other happened somewhere else. You can't do that. That's not the show. So that probably was a pretty I think for me anyway, a pretty major realization, and it kind of refocused somewhat. As far as the toys concerned, the characters, um, my memory is, and I've been corrected, but I still think I'm right, of course, that we would never, ever, and there's a guy who worked for LJN, whose name I don't remember, Buddha has him in the book, who said that he was in every script meeting. And, he introduced this character and that character and the other character. It's absolute bollocks. I only remember one time that Stan Weston came in with a kind of generic dinosaur that I think, included as a moat monster, or maybe we didn't, but that was the idea. And at that time, because I was, really very ignorant about many of the things about in this genre, I was indignant that anybody would dare to come in and tell us to put this character or that character in the show. You don't, what do you don't understand? You're a toy guy, you're a marketing, but you don't know anything about drama or scripts, or you don't even know the show. Because Stan, I mean, he was a lovely guy, but Stan knew bugger all about bugger all. So that's my memory. Now, Silver was completely different. That was, riddled with toy directives. And by that time, I basically had the option of either ameliorating what was happening and keeping with the show, which was really my baby, or just leaving. But Thundercats really, Safari Joe, whoever you care to think of, they were our inventions.
Okay. That is something that I actually wanted to ask you. And you've already mentioned this this fellow here. Let's take this out. So I want to know, Mongor is one of your episodes. Where on earth did he come from? Or probably where the hell did he come from? What was the
You
inspiration?
asked that question in your list of questions, and I thought, I know I got the name from was my thought process. I know I got the name from, wait a minute, where did I get the name? The name is actually a Balinese word for anger. But the character was sort of developed from, I don't know if you know an author called Dennis Wheatley, but he wrote a book called The Devil Rides Out.
I've heard the
And
title.
the devil was basically that image in the, I think the book cover, I don't remember. So I wanted to do a story that was really about Satan. But obviously I couldn't do that. I can't, And I also wanted to do a story that took us away from Mumra for a bit, So that's how that came about. The name is from the Balinese word for wrath or anger or fury. And the design, and here's an interesting thing, I don't keep any of my work. I have none of the scripts. I have nothing. And I wanted to check whether I described him like that in the script or whether it came out of a discussion. Whether I said to the artist, hey, there's this guy who's half goat, half this, half that. He's like the Satan, blah, blah, blah. Or whether I actually wrote it in the script.
Okay. So what happened with those scripts? If you don't own them, where are they? Are they destroyed? And I know a guy that has got some scripts.
Well,
We know him. Yes, Nick.
Nick has a lot. Nick has a lot of them. And he's been good enough to send me copies, I guess. Chris kept his scripts. I never keep anything, which it must be, I need to talk to a psychiatrist about it. I just don't keep anything. I don't, and I very rarely think about the past. I mean, this whole Thundercats phenomenon is very unusual for me. I mean, obviously I've been interviewed by all sorts of people about all kinds of work that I've done, but it's not really part of my consciousness. Plus, I've moved around so much. I mean, I've lived in a lot of different places, and at one time I lived on a boat for several years, and I just threw everything away, anything I had. So I don't know where they are. Is the answer to that.
Okay.
I mean,
Well,
I'll tell you one script that I have that it really, really upsets me that I lost it. I have a script that I wrote for Johnny Quest, and Hannah wrote across it, "This is the best animation script I've ever read in my life," and signed it. It's gone, disappeared.
oh no.
No, the interesting thing about that is that the poor bastard, Bill Hannah, was actually getting a little demented. So he was a little senile when he did that. And the other guy, Joe Barbera, hated almost everything I did. So, but, I wish I had it because, obviously Bill Hannah was Hannah was yes, an icon of animation. So no, I don't have any of the material. Maybe somewhere in a box somewhere that I don't even know where it is. It's probably in New Orleans or I don't know where, There's probably one or two bits of I think there's a SilverHawks Bible somewhere, but I don't know where it is.
Okay. So if there's anybody out there that has the Mongor script, please make contact with either me or with Peter, and then just so that we can see what's going on there. We need to know. Now we're interested. So
Yeah, well, I mean, but you know Nick, don't you? I mean,
Yes,
you
I
could
will
ask
ask
him.
him if he's got it.
I'll drop him a line and see if he's got the script. Actually, do you know what? He sent me a zip file with a whole lot of material in it, so I need to go through that. Maybe I've got it. If I have, I'll contact you.
Okay, that's awesome. That's awesome. So now talking about Nick, that's Nicholas Carver that we're talking about. He created also he made this
Yeah,
wonderful black widow
yeah,
shark.
yeah.
Um and I'm really fortunate to own one on, especially living on this side of the world, because getting stuff here is it's quite a mission. Um now this is one of your creations, the black widow shark. How does it make you feel when you realize that your creations have actually been made? I mean, Mongor was given a toy in the original LJN line. It's got a new life with the Super 7 line as well. But fans of the show are actually making their own creations based on your designs, and your story characters. How does it make you feel to see these things come to life? I mean, I
Yeah,
bet you never expected it.
you know, I mean, I knew almost immediately that when I'd left Rankin Bass, that I should have had one of every single toy unopened, you know, in its package.
Yes.
But yeah, so what? You know, because like I said, I never, I don't, I'm not proud of this. I mean, I think it's a weakness actually, but I just don't think like that. And no, going back to Africa, maybe that's a reason. I just don't think in those terms. And yeah, sorry, this is a bit of a diversion. I'm pissed off with Warner's and with Jules that they cheated me, but I'm actually more pissed off that they cheated Len. Um, and it doesn't wear on me, you know. On the other hand, looking at the other side of things, I'm amazed. I am truly amazed at the enthusiasm of people like you, like those kids in Colombia, Nick, Buddha, whoever it is. I'm stunned by that. It's dedication, actually. It's kind of, you know, and incredibly, I find it humbling and exhilarating. Um, Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say, and I've said this before several times. You know that yeah, the show is the show, but if there aren't any people watching it, it doesn't exist. It's like the tree in the forest, you know, and there would be no Thundercats without this huge family. So when I see that, and as I said, you know, I only really plugged into it recently. It's it, I just find it I'm kind of gobsmacked actually. And you know, I mean, I was in the square in this little town that I live in, or that I spend a lot of time in. I live partly here and partly in New Orleans, and I was with a couple of friends, and you know, I'm not 22 anymore, for Christ's sake. And uh, the two friends I was with are probably in their 60s, I think, 50s, 60s. And a slightly younger couple came up and, you know, they knew him and blah, blah, blah. And Richie always introduces me, always, the guy who wrote Thundercats. I don't know why. I mean, I keep Richie, for Christ's sake, it was 2 years of my life, you know? And the guy immediately, a Colombian, immediately leapt to his feet and did a whole Mumra impression in the middle of the square.
That's
So
awesome.
you know, it's kind of stunning. I mean, I I I I can't really say any more than that. It, it's stunning.
Well, I have to say, well, thank you for giving us such wonderful stories to that we grew up with, and that is still impacting so many hundreds of thousands of people today. I mean, I don't think people actually realize the scope of the reach that ThunderCats had on people worldwide. I mean, it's from. I mean, I grew up with it here when it came out. Just I think 86 it was that it aired on this side of the world. Um, but I know South America has got one massive following of ThunderCats. They've got
Yeah.
street art in of the cartoon in the cities, and it's astonishing to know how far it's reached. And I mean, I know Europe also had a big following there, and they were called Cosmo Cats in France as well. But I mean, I have been in Europe as a in when I was 19 and 20, and I actually saw the toys then in flea markets. So having seen that then is like, wow, this is global. This really is global. So thank you for doing something that touched so many people. And
You're welcome.
it's really just awesome to talk about the show and to ask you questions about where you got ideas. And I mean, there's one episode specifically that stood out, and that's something that's so different. It had the legend of King Arthur in there. How did that come about to introduce? Was it your British experience that you brought him, or that bit of folklore in there? How did that come about to introduce
Well,
that?
I'll tell you exactly how that came about. And I have to, give a great shout out to Jules Bass. Jules had the idea that the greatest sword in legend and myth is Excalibur. And so you've got the Sword of Omens and Excalibur, It just happens that I am a tremendous King Arthur buff. And I've read, I mean, particularly Mallory, who is, the ultimate Arthurian writer. So, I mean, I've probably forgotten a lot of it now, but I had, it was so kind of natural to me to be able to write that. And the thing is now, when I look at it, it's a very, very slow episode. It has a very slow build up. And I think, if I was doing it now, I would probably do it differently. But anyway, so it's my favorite. And yeah, that's how it happened. I mean, I love the whole Arthurian legend. I know a lot about it. And Jules had the idea of introducing Excalibur.
So there weren't any issues in terms of rights that you could use the story in there. Well, how was the overall reaction from the team when you gave them this? Were they like, yes, please, let's use this. This is working? Because I mean, it's that happened in Britain, but Thundercats were in Egypt. So something somewhere something
I don't, you
continents
can't,
probably moved
yeah, no,
around.
no, no, you can't, you can't apply that kind of logic. I mean, well, you can. I mean, but remember that Mumra was a kind of supernatural being. Um, and yeah, I mean, look at any Safari Joe or Dr. Dome Tone I mean, the world of Thundercats is so far removed or based on Len's work, but is also a tremendous riff on his work. It's a bit like this is a bit kind of pretentious way of putting it. It's like jazz. You have to have the bass line, and then you can go off with your um, variations and your improvisations, and that's really what we did. And I
Well, it
think
worked.
actually looking back that probably or possibly probably the whole Dr. Seuss's psychologist, every story has to have a moral. I think that probably held it together to an extent.
That's something that I wanted to ask you, because you wrote a very interesting script that is called Good and Ugly, and
Yeah.
that basically put a twist on what people perceive uh, is right and what is actually correct, with and deceiving when it comes to how you perceive things. So I know that there were child psychologists involved in making sure that there were lessons correctly translated through the actions of the Thundercats and the story that was told. What inspired you to write that episode?
I actually, it's very simple. You know, most of the stuff that I wrote, I didn't have the moral in mind first. You know, when I came up with the story, I then would look at the fact that it had to have some redeeming moral, actually, where they call them morals, which is a bit heavy. But this particular one, it just was okay. This show is for kids. Kids are very appearance prejudiced. You know, if you've got a cleft palate or a club foot or God forbid, you know, whatever you've got, it's very, you know, kids are very cruel about that. And so I thought, well, I'm going to make a hero who's instantly dislikable in appearance, um, and a villain who's, you know, the handsome, good-looking, whatever it is. It was a very simple response to that, and obviously the cliche that you never judge a book by the cover. That's all.
So
Nothing very profound.
talking about the way that they looked, you mentioned earlier you probably made notes and discussed it in meetings with how characters should look. Were you ever surprised when you actually saw the animation, and how long until after you've written it did you see what the characters would look like that you created?
Well, you know, the initial sort of conceptual design, I would see almost immediately. But then that design would go off to Tokyo, and the animators would kind of transform it into an animation design. And I don't remember the lead time, actually. Well, I don't remember how long it took from the script leaving my hands to it coming back as a rough cut, or not even a rough cut, you know, as a coming back as a finished product. I don't remember that. I don't think I was ever surprised. I mean, I think I was disappointed a couple of times, but I'm also very, you know, and I truly believe this is not kind of I don't know, creative bullshit. I think if you're running a show, or if you're responsible for the look of a show or the overall, there's a certain arrogance involved, because my view is, well, it's my responsibility. And I don't like to share that responsibility with any co-head writer. I mean, because I don't think you can create anything by committee. And I think that's why so many movies, so many shows are absolute crap today. But having said that, I think you have to listen and look and realize, okay, that's not how I saw it, but this is a perfectly valid way to go. So I'm sure that once or twice I probably had some incredibly elaborate design in my head. I thought, oh, yeah, we could do that. Oh, yeah, yeah. And it came back like that. Oh, wait a minute, that's not what I had in mind. Well, yeah, but that doesn't really matter if it works, you know.
Okay. Um, you were also involved as a guest writer, I'm assuming, for the 2011 iteration of Thundercats. You wrote the episode Forest of the Magi War. How did you get involved in that project?
Yeah, you know, that's one of the worst experiences of my life. One thing that I've never understood is why Warner's, when they've been talking about movies and this, that, and the other, never spoke to the original creative team. Never. I never understood it. And so anyway, at some point, these guys called me in and said, you know, we're doing a reboot of ThunderCats, and will you come in and talk about, see what we're doing and give us a view? So I went in there, and you're not going to like this, and they're not going to like it, and I don't really care. A bunch of arrogant, closed, insecure dicks. And the insecurity is something I understand because I've witnessed it very often. People like Chris, for example, or me, or you name them, people who've edited, story edited, have a career, have a reputation, are asked to go into a show, usually by the producers more than by the writing team. And you go in there and you know that you're a threat to them. And I mean, to such an extent that I've actually said, listen, my job's to make your job easier. I don't want your job. I don't want to run this show. I don't want to be the story editor. Give me 3 or 4 scripts to write, and I'll make your life easier. So I went in there, and they had various ideas, and some of them I quite liked, but it was clear to me that they had no clue as to what made the show work. Now, having said that, neither do I. I don't really know why the show was so successful, but I do know that they definitely didn't know, if you know what I mean. So anyway, I don't know whether it was just a SOP or I don't know. They asked me to write a show. So they gave me the idea that they wanted me to write about. It was probably one of the worst scripts I've ever written in my life. And the notes they gave me were absolutely dreadful. And anything I wanted to do with it to make it more like, quote, my unquote show, they just didn't. They either didn't get it or they didn't want to or whatever it was. And so that was the end of it. Now, I later discovered that they did actually talk to one other of the original team, which was Matthew Malik. I can't. I've talked about it with Matthew, and I don't really remember. I know that he wasn't impressed either. And of course, the other thing is, it was Warner Brothers, so they had God knows how many writers, God knows how many, executives, God knows how many people involved. We basically we were playing five-a-side football, and everybody else was playing more than 11. I mean, we were there was just this tiny little group. That we had the studio guys who were a world of their own and completely bonkers. We had the writing team. We had usually one designer, sometimes 2. We had Lee. We had Chuck Hasegawa, who had a very odd role that I never really quite figured out, but was absolutely delightful and obviously a key part of the team because he went backwards and forwards to Japan. And a very, very small production staff. I think we had 3 young women on the staff, Connie, Heather, and a very famous baseball player called Stan Musial, his granddaughter or niece. She was on the staff. And that's it. I didn't have an assistant. Nobody. And then the next show, well, ThunderCats didn't have an assistant either, but I did hire a couple of, SilverHawks, but I did hire a couple of sub-editors. But the next show I went to, I said, well, what are you doing? What are you doing in my office? Well, I'm your assistant. But I
It sounds like things changed drastically from the early 80s to the 2010s when this iteration of the show came out. How things have changed through the years. So you've now mentioned Silverhawks briefly. Now, I know, well, everybody's assuming, and it's been advertised as such, that Silverhawks and Tiger Sharks and Thundercats are part of the same universe. When you wrote for Silverhawks, um, were you told, listen, these shows are connected? Was there
No,
any confirmation of that?
no, no. I actually, I mean, I had to look up the Thunderverse because I think you wrote to me, and Thunderverse is a comic book creation, as far as I know, as far as I can tell. I don't think we ever even had any concept of the Thunderverse. And they're two completely separate, I mean, in my mind, separated in time, separated in physics, separated in just about every way they can be. Now, somebody said to me the other day, why don't you write or propose a combination Thundercat Silverhawk show? Which could be, I mean, it could be very interesting. I don't know exactly how you make them interact. I mean, I think probably Mumra, it'd probably come through Mumra's cauldron. He'd probably see, Limbo Galaxy and think this was an opportunity. I don't know, something like that. And it could be very interesting. I can imagine Stargazer and Jaga getting into it together and not agreeing about what the hell should be done. But no, they were completely separate, totally separate.
Okay, so there's one thing that I've picked up in both cartoons, and that is something that Mandora brought up, and that is the penal planet, where I know Monstar was in the penal planet 10, and then there was the penal planet in Thundercat side where who was it that she think it's Quick Pick over there. She took
Yeah,
him
it
there,
was a
and
Bill. I
so
think it was a Bill Overgard script.
yes, is that just coincidence that these
I'm embarrassed to say that when it came to Silverhawks, I never even picked up that connection.
Okay.
I think Jules, I think it's fair to say I did most of the development on Silverhawks, if not, yeah, I think I did most of it. Jules came up with some great characters, and he came up with the whole idea of Monstar being in jail and breaking out, with some sort of astral phenomenon. So it's his fault.
Well, he's a cool villain, and it's really what I liked about Silverhawks is you can hear the Thundercats voice actors in there, but it's a totally different spin. So it's actually nice to have that connection between the two shows.
Yeah.
What is one of your favorite memories of Silverhawks? Writing for Silverhawks. What
Oh,
did you?
Silverhawks or
Yes,
Thundercats?
Silverhawks.
I think I think writing the Bible and trying to communicate with Masaki. I mean, we were very good friends, but Masaki was a very literal, logical guy. And I don't know whether it exists anywhere in the whole Thundercat, Silverhawks aficionado world, but there was a map of Limbo Galaxy, which actually has a boundary. It's almost like a Chaka's fence of thorns. It's like that's what it looked like. I think that's why I drew it like that. Um, and as you know, all the characters breathe in Limbo Galaxy. I mean, it doesn't matter where they are, and physics works, kind of. So yeah, it does. Physics works, and when we wrote the scripts, we wrote exterior blah 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 night or interior blah 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 day, and Masaki would go, "It's in space. There is no fucking day or night." But that whole, going to Japan with this Bible that was absurd. I mean, I love it, and it was just largely my work, and it's completely absurd, and I know it's absurd, and I made it absurd. And trying to, get this, get the logic of the absurdity across to the animators was probably the greatest thing I enjoyed most. But I also enjoyed, I mean, I think I wrote a script called The Zeke's Fumble, which is a sort of pretty stupid idea where the taxi driver, Seymour, gets hold of a secret roll of film. Roll of film? In the what? In space? Anyway, roll of film that has all the SilverHawks secrets on it. And actually, it's Poker Face that gets hold of it. And Poker Face loses it or hides it in the taxi. And the taxi goes through hell trying to get the thing to Hawkhaven. I mean, I enjoyed writing that. I love that kind of stuff. I just love writing. Well, actually, I love writing, so it doesn't really matter. Um, but yeah, that probably trying to persuade everybody that this wasn't a completely insane show, construction.
Well, we are lucky that we are not in that time in the future where we can actually go into space and drive around in our scooters and bikes. Because if kids were to watch the Silverhawks, then they'd just be going out of space and thinking they could breathe because that's how it was. I mean, even ThunderCats Mandora on the bike, she was flying around and breathing without any mask or anything. But it is fun to see these things. I know a lot of the times when there's conversations online, people talk about it. It's like, but they can't breathe. They can't breathe in space. It's not
Yeah,
logical. But that's the fun part of it. So I'm gonna wind down now because we can
yeah,
talk for hours and hours and hours. But I just want to ask something about, you mentioned earlier on that you have written like an autobiography, fictionalized version of your childhood here, called Fishing for Crocodiles.
yeah.
And you've recently released a third update to this. Can you tell us quickly about this new iteration of the book? What was the inspiration behind doing an update to that?
Well, I wrote the original, and I realized that I got the music and the date of independence of Zambia. They didn't work, they were incompatible. And so then I did a second edition that adjusted that. But at the same time, I had written a screenplay for a South African producer, actually, guy, very nice guy, Michael Gaines, and another one called Mike Orrit, who actually I'm rather pissed off with at the moment. But and in that, because we were writing it, as a screenplay, the drama changed, and the story, very very briefly, the story is that these two kids um, run away, which I did. But in the book, where it goes into fantasy is that because they want to get to Lorenzo Marx Radio, which was the premier rock station, and they wanted to meet their hero because they thought he was going to be interviewed there. Of course, he wasn't going to be. It's just going to be a taped interview. And in doing so, they run into all kinds of, they run into Salute Scouts and, guerrillas and freedom fighters, whatever you want to call them. So putting that drama together, I had the parents track them, and it made a much more dramatic story. And so that's why I made the change for this third edition. And to be perfectly honest with you, some years ago, I would write something and I'd read it and maybe edit it a bit, and that was it. And over the years, I've come to realize that really one of the great weaknesses of my writing is that I don't edit enough. I'm not harsh enough with myself. You know, if I write something and I think it's funny, then it's going to stay. It's going to stay there forever, even though actually it's really, you know, it's just one beat too much, or do you know what I mean? So, having the opportunity to edit it, I think I cut out a couple of things that I found a little bit sort of cringe making because they're a little bit preachy, you know.
So I'm gonna ask you for the this is available on your blog. Links to get this book.
The
Is
book?
there a link? Is there a link to the book on your
Yeah, yeah.
website?
There's a link on the that you can click through the site, and it's available on Amazon. So,
Okay. Okay, so and we did touch on your blog at the start, and I'm honored to have been featured on there. Thank you so much for that. It was wonderful to write about my Thundercat story, but um, you have shared so many other Thundercats of the day on your blog as well. And as you said, that this thing is going to branch out. There's so many people involved in Thundercats and SilverHawks that have played a role. And I wish you all the best with this and more success with this, and it's probably a new experience for you to relive things that you didn't expect to catch up with you 40 years later. So
no, I never thought it would happen. And actually, I mean, I'm now at the point where I've got to think about who else I want to get onto that Thundercat of the day. And you know, I don't really know enough of the fans personally. I don't, you know, I don't have connections. So what I think I'm going to do is write a brief post wondering why it's successful. And in that, I think I'm going to put out some kind of call for anybody who loves the show, who wants to write a, you know, a couple of pages or page or whatever, and I'll just keep it going if I can. And I'm going to I'm going to switch to Silverhawks, and then maybe Johnny Quest, and maybe Peter Pan. I don't know. We'll see.
well, that's probably one of the main reasons to that this interview happened, is because I want people to know about that. I mean, I saw your name growing up. I saw your name so many times. I never thought about it. And so it's just wonderful to be able to talk to you, and and I'm fangirling over here, being very excited to meet one of my heroes that I didn't even realize. But it's my hope that people can see that there's a bigger picture, like you've discovered now as well, with this massive Thundercats community that's out there. So I'm gonna spread the word, and I'm gonna tell people about this and bring them back to your blog. And I just once you've written that invitation, I sure hope that it spreads a lot of word between a lot of fans, and just shows how big Thundercats has been, and it's all because of what you have done for us.
Well, first of all, I really appreciate it. I mean, and it's an honor, you know, that you would contact me and ask these questions. I hope that it goes as wide as it can go. I mean, not just so that people know that I wrote a book here or there, but just that we can fill in a lot of stories that I thought, you know, I mean, I learned stuff that I didn't know, and I was, you know, I ran the part of the show. I had no idea that that happened in the studio or that happened over there or what. I had no idea. So I
Well,
think, you know, the more we can gather the information, the more complete the story of Thundercats will be.
and on that note, I'm gonna leave it there and say,
Good.
well, thank you. That
It's a pleasure.
it's wonderful to see
Anytime.
where it's gone, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me, and we'll be catching up again soon.
Anytime. Anytime.